Okay, dokie. So, YouTube channel is still terribly disorganized, so this is by no means a video that is being done after the rework is complete, but it is one that I kind of have time to do right now anyway, in between different people being on for video games, and is semi-topical to a few comments I've made on Reddit in the past few days. Semi-topical to it being like using some of the items that were most recently introduced, and hopefully being pretty short. The timeline also works out because I wanted to test this out in some more steel cradles, and lo and behold, there's another copper steel cradle right now. So basically this is me trying to find a use case for the savior cabin, which has not been getting very much love from the community. Not to say that it's not unwarranted. So for those who are not aware, it is the newest cabin. It does come from a super sick pack though, which includes pretty fancy like oil spill paint, Bigfoot wheels, which are now finally part of a pack rather than being crafting / market only, amongst other things. And then pretty hearty amount of supporting modules of decent tier. So overall not a very bad pack, but in any case the perk is kind of interesting. So despite the savior being a heavy cabin, the parameters are on the lighter side of things, and its perk is based off of dealing collision damage. So that's kind of rough in general, trying to ram things with a heavy cabin, since while this is a faster heavy cabin than the other heavy cabins, 65 kph compared to, you know, the medium or light cabins, which can reach up to 115 kph rather easily. It's kind of left behind, but basically, I saw the cabin. It is also apparently based off of Terminator 2 or something like that. I've not seen the series, so I can neither confirm nor deny that, but I generally trust the community to know references for stuff. But it is a cabin which I thought, oh, you know what, this would work great with another weapon that likes dealing boosted damage on collision and is fairly tanky. So that's basically what this entire build is focused on. It's running the Gremlins, which are the upgraded goblins, which also have a perk which increase damage for a period of time after hitting an enemy. So pretty straightforward, me just trying to ram enemies and then getting a 55% damage bonus for gremlins. You have to melee them anyway for the savior cabin to work. They have melee resistance. You have to be within close range in order to melee people. They're close range weapons. It just kind of works out pretty easy synergy in my eyes. So the other things which I figured would kind of be necessary for the build, just for the sake of actually being able to catch up to things, Sabbath wheels, so they, you know, increase speed and power when you take damage, which again, if we're ramming things, we are going to be taking damage. Even, you know, it's not a significant amount, hopefully, for us. We're going to have a cheetah so that we can go faster and also reduce the cooldown time on our chameleon, so that'll let us hopefully get closer to some of the fast builds without them realizing flanking, doing all that good kind of stuff. Heater, well, not a heater I guess, but a radiator and a cooler, and then a averter so that we can stack damage resistance on the already damage pass-through weapons, especially since again we're going to be, you know, ramming things with them. And despite the damage pass-through and whatnot, 180 damage or durability each when you're ramming things doesn't tend to be a whole heck of a lot, especially because you tend to have them pretty close together and they're not, you know, resistant to blast damage. They tend to be shot off really easily if people are using things like cannons and whatnot. So the theory behind it's pretty straightforward. The co-driver I wanted to use originally was Phobos, with the original intent of going even faster with the KPH, and then having the increased damage in CQC as well as boosting visibility factors. But that doesn't really work so well, because when you receive damage it blocks the charging of the talent, and when you ram things that counts as receiving damage. So you literally can't get the effect unless you don't ram things and people aren't shooting at you at the same time, neither, which is really realistically going to be happening. So I ended up going with Yuki, which is like the budget Phobos anyway. So just being close to enemies and behind them, which is, you know, ideally where you're going to want to be ramming them anyway, increases the damage of your weapons. Pretty straightforward. Doesn't get destroyed or cancelled rather by taking damage, and it can build up infinitely and be active infinitely as long as you stay behind enemies. It doesn't have a reset period like Grizzly or Billy or Falcon or whatever it does. So that's pretty convenient if we can, you know, stay behind people. And then obviously the effects are maybe not explicitly what we want for, you know, the perks, but I mean, they're not bad. They certainly don't hurt what we're doing, so no complaints there. So I did kind of lie when I said my original idea was Phobos. The original idea was much worse than what I have currently. So as I said to Bang Shield, who was actually asking about this build, because this has been a work in progress for the last week and a half, 2 weeks or so, and I tested out a few different things originally. I was running 6 gremlins without a cheetah and without a cloak, and that worked okay-ish, but had some concerns with actually getting close to things. So it was actually survivability concerns, even though I was dealing a bit more damage. And then obviously positioning issues, actually catching up, ramming people, etc. So then I swapped it down for 5 gremlins and then a cloak and a cheetah, but then I was about 11,000 power score, so I was consistently getting matched against people of 11, 13, 14, 15,000, and this build can't do jack shit to builds that are running things like Helios or Punishers or especially Scorpions on hovers. I straight up can't catch up to them. So this is the final, well, maybe not the final, but the current iteration in any case, where I felt pretty happy with the results of it. So that is obviously running the 4 gremlins with a downgraded generator, and then the chameleon and cheetah, which does let me have, of course, the lower power score, so I can actually be in my own weight class instead of trying to run a heavy, slow build with shotguns against, you know, the like clan war viable builds. So this isn't probably going to be too terribly exciting for the tear apart. Maybe if I'd kept a few different versions, but as it stands, my blueprint slots are fairly full because I haven't been cultivating them very well recently, and I didn't really feel like making literally a dozen hours worth of building and upgrading on this, because that stuff tends to be pretty dry. But the original idea, because I was running 6, was actually using the Omamori instead. So I will maybe just do the teardown on what I currently have, thoughts, build processes I kind of went through, and then sort of discuss where I was started and where I ended up now. So actually, no, I'll do it the opposite way. I'll talk about the other ideas I had. So to start with, I actually had, I don't know if you'd maybe call it like a revolver style for them, but as it currently stands, the averter is located connecting all of the gremlins, of course, which totally makes sense because we have the 2 power pips on either side, and we can just center that so the top one is on the bottom of the averter's power pip and vice versa with the top. Then we can also face it forward or backwards and touch on other things. The original idea was actually to achieve something similar but with the Omamori, because while it's generally an awkward shape and has power pips in awkward locations, what you can actually do, because unlike most weapons, the gremlins have connection pips on all sides, which means that you can place them in almost any orientation, is you can place them lengthwise along this bad boy. So you can actually run a, like I said, I don't know if there's officially a term for it or anything. I'm sure I'm not the first one who came up with it, but a sort of revolver style gun arrangement. So I'm not going to have enough energy for all of these unless I strip the other stuff, namely the cheetah and chameleon. But you can basically see how you'd be able to have 6 of those all focused around the Omamori, and then you actually have exactly enough space to put in the new passive melee weapon, the King of Birds. in the center, and that doesn't interfere with any of their firing angles. If and when you end up losing some of the gremlins, you can ram stuff with the King of Birds. It has a lot of durability, and then it also gives the Omamori, or also gets more, you know, durability resistance from the Omamori. So this configuration was actually pretty cool, and I sort of still wish I could stick with it, but a couple of things made it rather unusable. So on top of the rather awkward size and shape, like the Omamori is always going to be awkward, so this is probably like the least bad position it could be in. Undermounting one of the gremlins, or if you turn this entire thing sideways and had it be 2 gremlins on the top and 1 on either side, etc. 4 pips on the bottom does interfere with frame placement a bit. And then obviously you have this like enormous 6x6 block that's kind of hard to armor around because of the length of them. And then you have this little tail end sticking out. It didn't work too great, especially because, like I said, all these gremlins bunched together made it a prime target for things like avalanches or other cannons. And then additionally, it's the Omamori, so it has a health limit. So what I actually end up finding was I would ram things, and I would immediately deplete the Omamori's damage resistance. So yes, while it gives me another 50% damage resistance with how it stacks, which isn't exactly having the remaining difference of damage, nor, you know, preventing it from taking any damage, it would help a lot for the original collision, but I already have 90% damage resistance on that, and then afterwards I would have to wait for it to recharge, and at that point I've rammed somebody, activated the perks, and, you know, started blasting. So not having the damage resistance and then having all these components right next to each other, it was really easy for people to strip the entire build. So I kind of ventured away from that. So like very shortly thereafter I got rid of the 1 gremlin, so I tried running 5 with the cloak and chameleon, the cloak and the cheetah, and that didn't work, so I got rid of another, and I dropped down the tier of the generator for the power score thing, and then I still found, okay, this isn't really going so great, and honestly at this point with the size and shape, I can probably just run the averter instead. So that is what I ended up doing, got rid of the Omamori pretty quick. But again, I love the aesthetic, at the very least, of the Omamori's like revolver of gremlins. So who knows, maybe I'll end up doing that again for some sort of arc build or something, I don't know. So then using the averter, I actually had this backwards, quote unquote, from before. So I had the gremlins attached in front of it, and then obviously you could either raise up the entire batch of them another pip, or you could build frames around them or whatever. And as I showed there, you can obviously also spread them out a little bit more, although you do have, you know, a fairly awkward 2x4 gap in the middle then. But I kind of found the same issue where it was really easy for people to just destroy the components. And then I wasn't really having these side pips connected to anything, so while I could put armor alongside the, you know, 140 health of the armor directly adjacent with the damage resistance, didn't really benefit a whole heck of a lot from it, especially because the gremlins ended up being stripped pretty early, pretty easily. So I have since spaced them out, reversed the direction of the averter, although maybe I'll turn it around again, and then put in some modules, because originally when I had the Omamori, it was directly attached to the cabin, and then I had some modules behind it, and honestly I didn't really run into any issues with people like just getting behind me and blowing all my stuff up, which is normally the problem when you have all your, you know, stuff behind. But I really do like the aesthetic of the Savior being at the back of the build, rather than having like trying to angle up the armor on the front and back to protect it some more. I can just have a rather gradual slope on the front and just cap off the back with armor or more things like train plows. This does help with the weight distribution a bit, and it does also keep the modules alive a little bit longer, because while they're technically in the line of fire once people are busting the gremlins, or if they're trying to, you know, just hit the center of my build from the front and blow up as many things. I've just found that they tend to be a little bit more durable than taking the odd cannon shot to the back and losing modules almost guaranteed, especially with the large size of things like the chameleon. Plus, this also helps with the weight balance a little bit more. And I mean, basically I have room for it, so it's sort of a why not thing. So I've slapped on some armor on the front, as well as capped it off with some small plows. So interestingly, for those who are not aware, the hexes, or sorry, the mesh of the small plow was updated a bit ago alongside a bunch of other melee weapons, or passive melee weapons, to try and prevent wedging. So as a result, its hitbox is basically like a rectangular prism, like a box, rather than this actual angle it seems to imply. So this is effectively a flat surface all the way across where the tip of the small plow is. So to that end, you have to be playing around with it a bit to make sure that you don't have the small plows and the hitbox for the gremlins, or if you use lower levels goblins, hit at the same time, because then the small plows will soak the damage. The gremlins won't technically hit unless you won't activate the perk of them or the savior, which kind of like is, you know, against the entire point of the build. So I have them pulled back a couple of pips from the end, as you can see, because the last pip, as you can probably see from me cursoring through it and it not detecting the gremlins, is just like cosmetic. And then you have another pip where the gremlin's actual collision is, and then after that pip I have the small plows. So they're primarily there really as bumpers for armor rather than as a, you know, passive melee weapon for ramming, but you can absolutely use it for that when you have the gremlins get destroyed. But I found that this works because on top of that, and then having the, I really love the look of this actually, I never tried it before, but the corner platforms and their rounded corners, and then the APC bumpers with their not really rounded but kind of rounded corners, stacked on top of each other. I have basically bumpers on either side of the gremlins, which keeps them alive a lot better when people aren't like directly focus firing them. And obviously if they're using things like explosives, they're less likely to fall off and then give people additional things to destroy quite easily. So I have some side armor. I've played around with it a bunch of different times, mostly just because the Sabbath wheels are super annoying to build around. You can't really directly do fenders on them, but you can do things like throw some of these up pretty tight. You can cap them off with the slanted APC doors. You can also do the opposite so that you actually have the APC doors on the back side, or you can even do the hard modules and then on the front maybe have the stuff like that. But basically a bunch of different options. So while this is probably the other one I'd consider, because this gives a nice length of being able to put the bumpers for the armor still on the front, this is obviously the wrong direction, but on top of being able to still put those underneath, or if you even wanted you could wrap it around a little bit, it makes this central area a power of 2, so 8x4 by 3 to 4, instead of the current one where it's actually extending out past the frames a little bit. So I have this kind of awkward divot in the middle, which I've kind of used as just with a large slope in the meantime. This is the other shape I'd consider, but I really like the rounded look of that. And then it also slants it a bit more, because otherwise if you have a flat top, then you have to have more armor to make it flush in the middle, and if I don't have more armor to make it flush in the middle, then I'm not covering my modules from the side. But if I have it slanted, I can still cover them, but with, you know, less pieces, because I'm not making it blocky, I'm also keeping it angled. And then that keeps the mass, weight, power score limits all down a little bit. So I wouldn't say maybe critical, but worked in any case. Likewise, if I did want to bump up the power score a bit, it's easy enough to just move the slope up a level, add some more angled parts, and then fill in the gap underneath with the little hazard sign container part. Like, very straightforward, at least to like build up from here if I feel the need to for maybe things like raids in the future. So that's why I've kind of settled on the current armoring design, at least. The freight train plow is obviously protecting the modules. Now, of course, if people are using things like autocannons or cannons or other explosives, of course, once you shoot at that, it'll blow the APC rears off, and then as you hit that, you'll still blow up these modules. But it's sort of a compromise of where and how I have the stuff protected, because I can't quite put flat armor on this due to a couple of pieces jutting out. So this is the best I could fit all the things within here. So you can see everything is directly resting on frames, which obviously, you know, is nice not to have any gaps, but I still have a couple of pieces poking up because the cheetah is terrible with its mesh, and the RN seal is larger than the rest of these by being a 4x4 footprint from the side as opposed to a 3x4, other than obviously again the cheetah having the one or the two pips here that are 4x4 and then the rest of it being 3x4, but whatever. But the train plow is nice, freight train that is, because its connection pips are actually just a 2x6 strip, so you actually have quote-unquote dead room for the mesh on the top and bottom because it is 4 tall. So I can just slap that in between these two parts sticking up, and while now this is not the most secure, I could actually have this because it's attached to the chameleon for one and the shiver for another. I haven't really had issues with this. Like, I don't feel like I'm losing all my modules before the freight train plow is stripped anyway, and people are really interested in just shooting my cabin and trying to destroy me, which, to be fair, it is an enormous target and it's a heavy cabin. So it's not like there's a whole lot more I can do about armoring it, so it does kind of distract them a bit, which is fine and works for me. Do have fuel. It's attached to multiple layers of APC stuff, so even if they blow off a bunch, it can still be on. It hasn't had really a great record with fuel, to be honest, but whatever, it's more of a bonus than anything else. And then underneath it's pretty straightforward. I just have the frames flanking the gremlins in the middle to attach to the small plows for more durability. I have 8x4s attached to the front wheels and 6x4s to the back. And then I have my generator there. Could theoretically fit some armor on underneath on the sides or, you know, under this block, but I haven't felt the need, and it would be another power score rework sort of situation. So I found that this is just fine as is. I do also have our radio tucked in, the innate fenders or wheel wells or whatever you want to call it of the Savior. Probably easier to show if I just do this. So yeah, in the pack they have the little avia slopes, so the little rounded 2x2s. Not the, oh, I guess they use the even smaller narrow slopes for whatever reason. But in any case, like, it's a 2x4x1, but it's curved, so you can't really put anything in there anyway, so I just threw in the radio because why not? And I did have a radar detector at one point before the power score concerns. Plus, I'm a shotgun build. I don't really need to know where somebody is from 400 meters away. I just need to share the information of, oh, hey, I'm on a dude shooting him in close range. Just need to share that, really, in my eyes. So I don't even know what else you could put in there, honestly. Maybe wheels, I guess, but then you wouldn't have any armor for the sides of the cabins. You wouldn't have fenders for the wheels, so I don't know. But if it's based off of any sort of real-world vehicle or, you know, media vehicle or whatnot, it kind of makes sense. Another note about swapping to the Cheetah is it is actually nice because I obviously got some extra tonnage out of it, and this isn't a crazy high max mass cabin anyway because it is one of the lighter heavies again. So my original design was running the hot red, so I could also reverse from people if need be and reposition. And then 6 Sabbath wheels. But when I swap to the Cheetah, it actually gives enough tonnage that, unless you want redundancy, which I don't particularly care for a whole lot, at least full redundancy, I obviously have partial redundancy because they're not going to shoot off just my wheel. They're going to blow off other armor and I'll still be under tonnage generally. And I do have, you know, bumpers and pretty tough armor parts protecting the Sabbaths anyway, but I found that this was actually a little bit better because it reduced my turning radius, it reduced the overall length of the build, which is already obviously pretty lengthy between the Gremlins and the Savior cabin and then the modules in the middle. Less power drain, which is nice, less mass going to the wheels. So overall, really happy with that. So that's why I've stuck with the cheating chameleon among other things, and the 4-wheel Sabbath design in theory would probably want to reduce the, you know, risk and power of them even more by using, or rather power drain of them even more by using a power and then durability or resistance fusion, but I'm not too terribly worried about that at the moment. So plus getting enough to do a guaranteed fusion would be another $5,000 for all the wheels, all the Sabbath wheels I have 10, which isn't too bad, but there's no guaranteed fusion for the Sabbath currently, and when they do roll around, they're generally not the power durability one that I want. And if I do the cheaper fusion event, it's a gamble, so I'd need roughly 3 Sabbath wheels per Sabbath wheel I want to fuse, so I'd need another 30, which would be $15,000, which is like 2 to 3 legendaries worth, so I'm not super concerned about getting them fused for 10% more durability and another like 5% total power drain saving. So as far as performance of it, it's actually done pretty good. Like I said, I'm not too worried about fuel, especially by nature of being, you know, close to people with a melee shotgun heavy build. Obviously I have issues with staying in range, actually connecting the hit because of the hit reg issues, although of course moving the small plows where I have them does make it a little bit easier. But having the fuel tanks at the back has been pretty okay. Obviously there's a mixture of the true PvP and the raids in here, but I was actually surprised with how well the raids went. So as I posted on the Reddit to the response to somebody's question on it, I found that they actually worked pretty well, this build, surprisingly, especially considering how it's, you know, A, not a raid build, and B, it's a shotgun melee build. But I found it like was doable. I was pretty carried by teammates, so the plan here being that, look at that, how convenient it's even shotguns today. So I can run this steel cradle, see if that is, because I think I still need one more copper raid. Yeah, see if my luck from yesterday holds over, or if it is actually a viable build, and then I'll also have some PvP clips to show. So I could, in theory, I guess, like, upgrade this for the raid, but my point being that without any upgrades, I literally just ran this into a hard steel cradle, which is the hardest raid that exists in my eyes, alongside, you know, of course, some higher power score teammates. It went a lot better than I had anticipated, because steel cradles are generally rough, even if you have multiple people that you're playing with or your teammates are super high power score, just by nature of how many enemies and how tanky the final boss is. So yeah, while I certainly don't want to say, oh, it works great if you get carried, it was the sort of thing where I didn't need to use any respawns on any of them, and I didn't even die before the boss on 2 out of the 3 raids. In fact, I think I went through the entire mission on 1 life in one of them. So yeah, I mean, as long as I'm getting matched with 13,000s, I can't exactly show it as being super crazy, but basically the only time I died twice was when I respawned, and I respawned next to the objective and all of the enemies that were spawning in from the objective. So not really a situation most people would be able to do well with, I think, in any case. We'll give it a go. And like I said, I do have the PvP clips. I could also just, I suppose, play some of the PvP, but the clips do show prior builds, so I think it'll be useful for the sake of kind of showing how the build has developed. Obviously with all my talks of them. And also sort of why I felt the... Oh, wow, he is struggling. There we go. Alright, and why I felt the need to strip down the build to the sub 9500. And I mean, like, on paper it makes sense. Like, generally speaking, you're not going to be performing well in the above 10,000 power scores, which is where you see legendaries. Heck, you even see legendaries as low as 7 or 8,000 without people like seal clubbing. about running all epics up there, where there's legendaries and even relics. It just, on paper, it's not a terribly great idea either, unless you're running really good, you know, teammates. If you have communication, planning, you know, you can run things like Capcans there, because there isn't, you know, a better immobilization option. But, you know, having a full build of purples generally doesn't work unless the items are, you know, overtuned to begin with. Man, the internet is dying, so I'm streaming from my Xbox, which is what I'm playing on, to the PC, so I can stream it. But I'm not looking, like, I'm not playing off of the PC right now. I'm still looking at and playing off of the TV, and I'm still getting, like, the latency and rubber banding a little bit, and the headset cutting out. So I don't really think that should be as a result of me streaming to the PC. But maybe. It's having issues in any case, so I don't know how well the PvP will go. I'd also like to keep this under, like, an hour, so since I don't need to do more Steel Cradle raids after this, I'm not going to be too worried. Thank you for that, that's going to be very cool. About getting the other, like, all the fuel spent on camera or anything, so I can probably run the clips so that even still just do some PvP. But we'll see. Of course, matchmaking having its own whims and generally having issues with things like seal clubbing and or groups of people stacking up, you know, assuming I can even find a game and it's not like me against 12,000 something, but so just the way matchmaking and, you know, PvP in most games goes anyway, so not like that's something unique to Crossout or something I can avoid. It's just completely possible that my rather good session yesterday was just a result of the luck of matchmaking, though, which is hopefully not the case, because, like I said, I felt like it was performing pretty well overall, considering how most people kind of just saw the Savior as like a dump cabin and not really anything great, based off of it being a melee cabin perk on a heavy, but we will have to see, because I don't know the answer to that yet either. I will note too, on top of the ice obviously causing like decreased traction, it's interesting because this is the first build in quite a while where I'm only running 4 like wheels for movement parts. So I found that when I actually have all of the stacks up for my wheels for the power and whatnot, I actually do have some issues with like slipping, like not having good ground traction, because like there's just too much vehicle power maybe. Like I don't think it's like made worse because of the snow, although obviously if I'm on ice then I have that problem anyway, just because it's decreased traction on ice. But those are event things, so you know, theoretically next week or whenever the event ends, maybe they will take them off. But I still think the issue of the like too high power remains. So I've been having issues with actually doing like course corrections when I have all this stacks up. So who knows, maybe power drain might not be the solution. It's also interesting too, because they're taking away the function for the handbrake to like rev up and cause you to like lurch forward when you release the handbrake, after like, you know, still putting in forward input while the handbrake is active, which is weird. I'm not sure why they're doing that, other than maybe to counteract when sometimes if you handbrake but you have too much, I want to say it's too much power again, but I don't know for sure that that's the case. It might be some other factors, but I think if you have too much power while you're handbraking, your vehicle will still actually like be pulled forward, and that's part of what they're getting rid of. But this build doesn't actually have that problem normally when I have all the armor. It does now that it's pretty bare bones. Oh, maybe not. Yeah, so you can see me kind of being dragged forward a little bit. And in any case, when I have full armor and PvP or whatever, I won't actually be sliding a little bit, and that is something we're going to get rid of, so you never slide regardless of power or whatever the other considerations are. But this build doesn't have that issue when I have the full armor, which is actually pretty interesting, because a lot of other builds, including like tank tracks and whatnot, sometimes do. So yeah, I didn't even score as the lowest. In fact, very similar to one of the good dude in second place, I guess. And that's been pretty consistent, which, I mean, I can't exactly prove since I didn't clip the other ones, but you can look at the rewards and compare them to the prior matches, and it was about the same. It's not like I wasn't doing, you know, nothing. Obviously people, especially the porks, were doing great on the bosses, but didn't really feel like I was being super hard carried and I wasn't pulling my weight on them, especially because, you know, me not being in 4th place despite being the lowest power score by a pretty large margin. So that is probably the best example, but obviously the one with the lowest time. That would be indicative definitely of being carried a little bit more than normal. I think that was everybody running legendary weapons. Like a dude had retchers and another dude had porks as well, I believe. So that, I mean, it almost doesn't matter what build you bring to that. If you have teammates running porks and retchers, they're going to hoover up all the points and kills anyway. But not that I'm necessarily complaining about that either. So as far as the other things, I guess I could also do the easy raid. Or both of them, but I'm not going to really worry about the word for fire. Get some more of that good gameplay and revitalize people's interest in this. So the only other cabin I've actually tried with the Gremlins before was the Aggressor cabin for the Arena event, which was like Clan Wars Light 3v3 round based. And yeah, it was basically the same idea, especially because they came out at, I believe, the same battle pass. They're very similar in time in any case, where it was just, you know, charging in a straight line and ramming people. But like the difference in damage is 21% for the Aggressor, 25% for the Savior. But the conditions are slightly different, and it becomes very hard to course correct or make micro adjustments if you know, lose charge every 0.5 seconds, which is basically any period of time where you're making adjustments to your course. So they are actually buffing it by making it a 1 second delay before you lose charge after steaming. So maybe that would make it a little bit easier, but I just found like ramming at high speed with a light cabin that can't bring a lot of mass or armor did not go well at all. And it may have just been mostly as a result of it being Arena, but I was running it with Bigfoot wheels, Chameleon, and I believe this was prior to the co-driver rework, so I don't think it had Phobos, for instance. So it would have probably been Bulldog at that point. And then actually Capcan devices to try and like immobilize people, so I could actually do the hit and run loop more frequently rather than this, where I basically just charge into somebody and kill them before moving on to the next one. I just didn't really find it working too terribly well. So not to say that the Gremlins don't work on it. Somebody was actually asking on the Reddit about using it with the Ghost, for instance, which I was against for a couple of different reasons, but certainly could be doable. The Ghost perk is useful on pretty much any weapon in the game that you have, you know, as long as you bring cloaking, so... Yeah, I don't want to say that this is like the quote-unquote ideal combo or anything, but generally speaking, for any one weapon, I try and think of the best cabin and, you know, other supporting modules as a result that'll work with it, and I kind of feel like this is probably the best use case of the Savior, at least, unless you're running a full melee build. Because not only do the perks naturally synergize, but it also gives you a little bit more range with the shotguns, since you're obviously going to have issues catching up to things if you run the pure melee. And like it is, you know, a pretty hefty damage boost when you hit everything. So like if you had the perk up when you're shooting things regardless of co-driver or whatnot, that's another 55% damage. And then even though, you know, the top percent for the Gremlin at least doesn't last very long because it decays very quickly. But, you know, let's say 50% damage bonus on impact on shotgun, which are already pretty damaging. Pretty effective, especially because you can have somebody run healing on them for another 2 times damage. You could run more Gremlins. I mean, if I had 6 Gremlins and no cloaking or Chameleon, which admittedly, I keep saying the cloaking twice basically, but the Cheetah and Chameleon, and then upgrading the generator, because again, this is just a, you know, raid rather than PvP. Like, that's another pretty sizable boost to damage, and as you saw, even in the hard raid, I didn't really have issues with killing things. Of course, it's going to be dependent on what faction you're playing against, what difficulty, your ability to hit or try and avoid things like the ammo packs, because obviously they hurt when they blow up. So for instance, the Steppenwolfs, which was what the other 3 raids on the list were, kind of hurt, but because of the positioning of their ammo packs, I could still generally ram off something like a leg or something, and then back up ever so slightly, and then kill them with the shotguns by shooting the ammo packs, rather than trying to blow up the ammo packs with my melee, which is just a great way to die. So, hi guy, where are you going? Yeah, not that I think that this is the be-all, end-all, or like the only viable way to run melee in raids or anything, but I think you could probably, if this is sort of a playstyle or an idea or weapon or cabin or build or whatever that is kind of attractive to you, then I think this would be a great way to go about doing it, because like I said, you could basically, you know, add another 50% damage by adding 2 more gremlins, and then if you have somebody bring heating, or maybe you bring 5 gremlins and then a trombone or something, I don't know. I feel like you do a pretty good job of chewing through things, especially considering how poor melee and or shotguns generally perform in raids, especially in the hard difficulty. But like on top of my terrible steering, I'm not even having to ram half these guys for the perk. They're still dying pretty well. But that's obviously more so because this is easy than because I've been super cracked by any means. We'll also note that this specific placement, I don't know if I've hit the magic spot of the placement of the small plows or what, but this specific placement of like the gremlins and the other pieces around it, it just felt like perfect. Like this specific version of this specific build, I've never had an easier time consistently triggering on like melee hit proc. So even with the aggressor it was rough, even with like things like the Tusk or the Cerberus I had issues. Tusk and Cerberus having an awkward hitbox being a large part of those issues at least, but this is just worked great even compared to the other versions. Like I had the 6, you know, gremlin revolver configuration at one point, and that was sticking out a fair bit, and I still had lots of issues with getting it to trigger, and I haven't really had any issues with this one. So I mean, obviously the front of my build's really busted, so there's not a whole lot of things that could hit the enemy other than the gremlins, but I can even show on the testing range that even with all the armor and the small plows on, I can pretty consistently like get the perk to activate whenever I hit something, which is really nice, because I'm not even clear on if my issues beforehand were like the gremlin not contacting rather than the small plows, or something else contacting, or it not counting unless you hit a non-movement part, because that seemed to be how it was with the Tusk for a bit, where if you hit like a wheel or a track, it wouldn't count as like the collision damage for the stack, and it would not eat the stack and it would not eat the track. So like, to be fair, they also just had a lot of melee resistance, so maybe things with melee resistance don't generally trigger collision damage perks, I don't know. It's kind of funny, I'm actually having a rougher time here in the easy raid with survivability than with the steel Cradle, but of course a large part of that being the nature of having more enemies to hit. Still not too terribly worried about dying in any case. I still have half my health, so at worst I might lose my last gun. Like, well, whatever. Yeah. So I'll run another of those, and then that'll be pretty close to the 1 hour mark. So I'll probably run the clips. I'm gonna apologize ahead of time because I totally had those clips. I didn't even record all the best rounds, to be honest. I think there's like 3 or 4, and then there's a couple more thereafter that I got. And then in hindsight, I was like, well, I should have recorded that. Got like 3, 4, 5 kills or assists that match, but I didn't end up recording them anyway. So, yeah. I will play those, and I did mean to watch them ahead of time and trim them and maybe be able to give more directed commentary rather than I'm going to be watching them for the first time with y'all and commenting about it. So it might be a little bit messy and not very concise, but there are my streams in general. So I think generally speaking, hopefully if people are at the stage where they're watching the stream and they're getting the 45 minutes into it, they're probably okay with me taking another minute or 2 on each of the videos. Do love the ice in general, but it is terrible when I'm actually trying to keep up with somebody. Because obviously a large part of the build is actually being able to ramp things. Kind of hard to do that if they're able to just move away from me in a mostly straight line, do a slight turn, and then I spin out. Can't keep my momentum. Sorry, buddy. For what it's worth too, I did spin them around a bit when I was moving them back to the like revolver configuration, but the Gremlins have an asymmetrical like firing line box in the AR mode, yet despite that I'm not even sure they actually have different like degrees of movement in each direction, because I've tested around and spun them around in different directions and whatnot, and for the life of me I can't see any difference in the way that they're oriented. So I'm not sure that that actually is even a thing. Unlike the Goblins too, which have a 2x5 strip of connectors on 3 sides and a 2x6 on 1 side, where if you're running the, you know, some of the armor in certain places, you'd actually want to have the, for instance, the 6 strip on the outside of this one, so that the bumpers on either side are actually connected to it directly rather than just the top armor. Like the connections on this one are all identical, 6x2 on all sides. So I'm not so sure there's a difference by rotating them. And like I've tested this and I thought surely there must be, but I couldn't find one. I still do it just because it makes me feel better on the like a very off chance I'm wrong. But I literally couldn't see any difference. Like I'd have one rotated one way, have the one above it rotated the complete other way, and then I'd compare their like firing arcs from left to right and they'd be literally identical. So I don't know why my headset's dying for one. But then again, so is the game. So maybe better that I don't try and do PvP and stream the matches. But in any case, I have them all oriented so that they should theoretically have the highest angle of pointing up, because they are at frame level on the bottommost section, because I like the symmetry of having all of the stuff that's, you know, not the cabin sticking up above centered on the build, and then having them wrapped around and protected by frames rather than like conflicting with them, I guess would be the best way to put it. But as a result, they don't aim up very far. But that being said, again, regardless of the orientation, I think depending on how far away they actually have, they can actually aim pretty high. So like that's enough to degun somebody who's, you know, that distance away. you know, barring the optimal range and damage and accuracy and the movement and whatnot. But it does shrink pretty quickly, just as a result of course, them being super fixed angle weapons. So you're not going to be able to hit anything other than pretty much what's almost directly in front of the guns when you actually bam somebody. But like I said, you do actually have quite a bit of angle when you back up, at least. So that's me on relatively flat ground. You can see I can hit the top of the slope, so. What are we having issues with? Of course it's the clip drone guy. Yep, they do that. Oh, that's a build. Sure, Mr. Mrs. Mix whatnot. Terminator appreciates the city cabin being in there. Sorry, a little bit. Dude's getting into CQC range more frequently than I am. Definitely block that guy. Here to observe, not interfere, I promise. Sorry, dude. See, I use the blue flares on this vehicle because blue is the speed color. Because everybody knows the color of wind is gray. And what is gray if not a desaturated blue? Okay, so I will probably cancel the Xbox streaming and show those videos, which should hopefully be uploaded by now, because I don't think there's really anything else to show on the build itself. So for the clips, yeah, so it looks like 3. So this first one should be from it being in the, yeah, so this is the 5 in the revolver figuration, I believe, when I was still playing at the higher power scores because I still had the Apollo. So, disclaimer, these ones with the higher power score, the clips are mostly me just getting assists and like polishing off things that the teammates actually dealt with. But I mean, it's still, I think, a pretty good example of, you know, the build in action. So it also feels rather loud. So it's interesting to note, actually, this explicit guy, the Makilla, was somebody who I didn't really capture all of the Scrabble here, but I did actually compliment them because they were death spiraling with another player, a Flame Dog, in like a couple of matches beforehand, and them using the spark allowed them to slow the other person and they're turning enough that they could just death spiral endlessly, not get hit by the flames, and continue zapping them. So I actually complimented them on that. And then in this match where we had somebody quit, as you can see pretty early on, we had him against us, obviously, and he was trying to death spiral against me, but the like pretty quick turn radius and me only having the 4 wheels on top of having the Sabbath increase my power and speed as I take damage from something like a flash, actually allowed me to win the death spiral on this guy. So he wasn't able to melee me, and I barely shoot his butt, but I was shooting his butt, and then he decided to tackle my, you know, teammate instead, which makes sense. But in any case, unfortunately, I didn't get that on here because, I mean, it's, you know, 2 minutes of gameplay, and that was earlier in the round since we missed, you know, the entire first minute. But I suspect they weren't really a fan of me in my Gremlins out death spiral. But you can see it looks like I pretty much killed them with the melee impact, even though I didn't get any of the buff on the Goblin or the Gremlin with that, which is interesting. So I think, like I said, especially that eagle in the center, that may have actually extended past the Gremlin's hitbox and been part of the reason I wasn't able to get like consistent hits with it. Which reminds me, I did need to show me actually getting the consistent hits in the testing range. So this is another great example. So obviously I had a teammate help considerably, but the really nice thing about this is while I'm not crazy fast, I do go fast enough that I can kind of mostly keep up even with the speedier hovers, and as a result I can basically just keep blasting their underside, which is the nice thing about having the weapons mounted so low. So it's actually a bit higher on here, so you can also see that it's actually like level with the above the top of my armor, this with the cabin base. But even still, like, pretty low relatively speaking for builds, especially compared to hovers. It lets me just kind of eat up and mulch their insides over and over, which is a lot more convenient than them just backing up and continuing to shoot at me. So it's very hard for them to de-gun me, especially when they run things like hurricanes. And in the meantime, I can just keep blasting at them, which you don't always have the option of doing. But sometimes they make it easy. So I will say I'm very proud on eating multiple very large hovers in this match, but I mean that's just sort of a matchup thing where it's surprisingly good as like a pseudo dog build rather than being necessarily, you know, oh my build is so OP it mulches hovers. It also helps that, you know, the dude was running hurricanes, but first, this one, I believe the last two are both on the lower power score after I removed another gremlin. No, I guess this one's higher. So maybe I only have the one on the... Yeah, okay. No, not you. Yeah, it looks like I'm running the same configuration, so this is probably very soon thereafter, especially because there was also inmate Trump in the last match, or the last recorded one. They're in here as well, even though I think they may have changed builds. And this was me mostly focusing on being like a defensive dogger build rather than like pushing up as you'd see in the last one, because my teammates were kind of sticking all nice and close to each other, so I figured, okay, well, I'll just deal with anybody who tries to get in CQC and cause issues, which is generally not a bad idea for being a solo, you know, CQC or melee build, because otherwise then you have something like this where a dude with fortunes rolls up and like wipes the back half of your team because they can't deal with dog builds. So that was just that dude, for whatever reason, thinking they could just run away from me. I'm not going to necessarily say that was a great kill or prowess on my end or anything, especially since I had teammates helping. I just feel like they didn't do a very good job of attempting to get away, so. And see, this dude just tries to like back up and force me out of the way without realizing that, like, the gremlins do actually hurt quite a bit. Like, especially for things that are 2 energy, so you can stack quite a few of them on pretty quick, and I didn't even have, like, my gremlin perk active there. Like, if you let them munch on you for a while, if you don't focus on destroying them or getting out of range or not, you know, letting them turn enough to hit you, they can do damage. Like, even here you can see I'm just tickling the dude at far range for, you know, maybe 100 damage per couple of shots, but it's still pretty good in the sustain long run. So another one where, again, it relied on teammates pretty heavily, but again, when you look at the power scores of them, it's like not really a surprise that I wasn't exactly soloing the 4-0. And for the last one, this one I think I would consider significantly more mean than the other ones. I don't know if maybe the, you know, 12 to 14,000s are punching above my weight, especially with the Apollo generator, but this might be punching below my weight. I don't know. It doesn't really feel like seal clubbing and on paper. I mean, it's a all epic part build sans the generator, which is, you know, a special tier. But it does feel fairly effective for what it is in any case. So it was nice that the gremlin prices dropped so I could try them out with the Savior. And as you can see, this was after the rework. So I'm running the 4. I'm running what I had for the armor design for the front and sides. So it didn't have the higher front slope. It was kind of wrapping more tightly around the wheels and being lower on the sides, and then having some more armor on the middle side to protect the modules. Not to say that was necessarily a great idea either. And then this is also when I had the averter in a way that I could actually also get the train plows attached. So the averter isn't sideways here, and so that's also what allowed all the goblins to be right beside each other. Or sorry, the gremlins to be right beside each other. So I actually had the averter vertical here, so I could also wrap modules around it, and then have the train plows protected, and as a result, protecting the modules a little bit better. So I don't know if I end up going back to this design, maybe. Especially now that I've spread the gremlins out, it's going to be kind of hard to, you know, do that, but it is a little bit harder now that I have the modules reworked so that I have the 2 bits poking up. So this is, again, not, these aren't by any means me just like carrying the entire team, but it is me doing pretty good work. And I was actually pretty surprised here how I was able to get the like multiple kill confirms with only the 1 gremlin, which again I think speaks to how powerful they can be when you have the, you know, perks actually activate. So that's those, and again, that was a much tighter... Watch me miss the scoreboard. That was a much tighter power score lobby in general, but it was really slanted, you know, in my favor, considering how there's multiple 7,000s, 8,000s, rather than it being, you know, everybody at 9,500 with me. So, you know, credit where it's due, it wasn't exactly me killing a bunch of 9,500s, but I also didn't have the forethought to actually record some of those 9,500 matches, so. And we're just going to ignore the bad audio, which sometimes happens, just to show how consistently this can have the perk hit. Man, it's so good. Alright, so I can get it on hovers. I can't get it on movement parts like the big rams, but otherwise anything else, pretty much anywhere I hit. It's very consistent, which is convenient and definitely not how it was for the vast majority of the time. So, Yeah, that's annoying. So not to say that it's like the perfect arrangement or anything either, but I'm pretty happy with the current arrangement of the parts. So normally I toss stuff up on the exhibition for a bit after doing a video, but this is one that I kind of want to play around with some more as like an actual functional run rather than just like an art build or an art/functional one. So I don't think I'll do that here, especially because all my builds on the exhibition are also full, especially while we still have the helicopter propeller/event for it. So it's yeah, not an immediate concern for me, but that does end us very close to the 1 hour mark, so I can probably throw up chapters on this in the other video, which I totally forgot to do for like a month, and then post this as a response to a couple of things I've been talking to people about in regards to the Gremlins and/or Savior.